The metallic clasp of the handcuffs echoed through the hushed expanse of the bank lobby. Officer Derek Miller, a smug expression on his face, tightened the cold steel against her wrists, utterly convinced he had apprehended a cunning perpetrator. Her pleas of innocence, her mention of official credentials, all fell on deaf ears. He saw only a woman who didn't fit his preconceived notions. Little did Officer Miller realize that the individual he was unceremoniously escorting into his patrol car was no mere patron. She was Vivian Banks, the newly installed district attorney, poised to orchestrate a legal confrontation that would leave the entire metropolis stunned. The midday sun cast a sharp glare on the gleaming glass facade of Sovereign Capital Bank, a prominent institution situated at the core of the city's financial district. This was a realm where bespoke suits commanded prices higher than most automobiles, and the air conditioning perpetually circulated the faint, crisp aroma of newly minted currency. Vivian Banks entered through the imposing revolving doors, adjusting the strap of her nondescript canvas tote bag. Her attire, an oversized gray hoodie, comfortable yoga pants, and well-worn sneakers, her hair casually pulled into a messy bun, was a stark departure from the typical clientele of Sovereign Capital. It was her day of rest, a rare commodity for someone in her demanding profession, and she had dedicated her morning to assisting her elderly father with his relocation to a new apartment, a task that involved a considerable amount of strenuous box lifting. Exhausted, a little grimy, and yearning for the simple comfort of a hot shower, she nonetheless had one more obligation to attend to. Within her tote bag lay a cashier's check for $75,000. This represented the final settlement from the sale of her late mother's residence, a protracted and emotionally taxing legal process that had finally concluded after months of arduous negotiation. Vivian's sole intention was to deposit the funds, transfer them to her father's account, and then finally relax. She joined the modest queue at the teller counter. Despite the brevity of the line, an air of palpable tension permeated the banking hall. A security guard stationed near the entrance, a man named Frank, who typically offered a perfunctory nod to familiar faces, observed her movements with an unnerving degree of suspicion. Vivian, accustomed to being scrutinized, though usually in the commanding presence of a courtroom rather than a banking queue, chose to ignore him. Upon reaching the counter, the teller, a young man named Gary, whose hair was slicked back and whose demeanor was decidedly nervous, offered no greeting. "Can I help you?" Gary inquired, his voice devoid of warmth, lacking the customary welcome to Sovereign Capital. "Yes, I'd like to deposit this check," Vivian replied, her voice maintaining a calm, professional tone, incongruous with her casual appearance. She placed the check and her debit card on the polished marble counter. Gary picked up the check, his eyes widening imperceptibly at the considerable sum. He glanced from the check to Vivian's hoodie, then back to the check, skepticism etched clearly across his features. He tapped intently at his computer keyboard, his brow furrowing, before typing again. Quote _2__, Gary stated, avoiding eye contact. Quote _3__, Vivian responded. Quote _4__, quote _5__, Gary announced abruptly, without awaiting her reply. He then stepped away from the window, taking Vivian's identification and the check with him. Vivian let out a sigh, glancing at her wristwatch. While she had anticipated a potential delay, the almost aggressive manner in which Gary had seized her identification struck her as peculiar. She leaned against the counter, her fingers rhythmically tapping. From the glass-enclosed office situated behind the teller stations, Brenda Higgins observed the unfolding scene. Brenda, the branch manager, was a woman who took immense pride in maintaining the impeccable order of her establishment. She watched as Gary approached, speaking to her in hushed, urgent tones and gesturing toward Vivian. Brenda peered through the blinds, her eyes narrowing as she assessed Vivian's attire. Quote _6__, Gary whispered, presenting the check to Brenda. Quote _7__, Brenda held the check up to the light, examining its authenticity. It appeared genuine, yet her inherent biases were already clouding her professional judgment. Quote quote underscore 8 underscore 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 quote underscore 9 underscore Gary inquired. Brenda adjusted her blazer, her voice firm. Underscore underscore quote underscore 10 underscore 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 quote underscore 11 underscore Gary asked hesitantly. Underscore underscore quote underscore 12 underscore Brenda snapped. Underscore underscore quote underscore 13 underscore Gary nodded and returned to the window. Brenda immediately picked up the telephone and dialed 911. Underscore underscore quote underscore 14. Underscore a dispatcher's voice answered. This is Brenda Higgins at Sovereign Capital Bank, located at 4th and Main, Brenda stated, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. I have a woman here attempting to cash a fraudulent check. She's exhibiting erratic behavior, and I suspect she may be dangerous. She paused, then added, Is she armed? I can't tell. Brenda fabricated this detail, injecting dramatic urgency to ensure a swift response. She's carrying a large bag. She's refusing to leave. Meanwhile, Vivian's patience was wearing thin. Underscore quote underscore 19 underscore she asked as Gary reappeared. Underscore quote underscore 20 underscore Gary mumbled, feigning a renewed effort at the computer. Underscore quote underscore 21 underscore Vivian was not easily deceived. She recognized the familiar evasion of a underscore quote underscore 22 underscore excuse when it was selectively applied to a single customer. She straightened her posture, her demeanor subtly shifting from that of a weary daughter to a seasoned prosecutor. Underscore quote underscore 23 underscore Vivian stated sharply. Underscore quote underscore 24 underscore quote underscore 25 underscore Gary stammered. Underscore quote underscore 26 underscore Vivian commanded. The inherent authority in her voice caused Gary to flinch. Before he could formulate a response, the distant wail of sirens grew rapidly louder. Vivian did not immediately connect the sound to herself. She had no reason to suspect the authorities were being summoned on her behalf. 2 minutes later, the bank's doors burst open. Officer Derek Miller strode in, his hand resting casually on his holster, followed by his younger partner, Officer Sarah Jenkins. Miller, a seasoned officer known for his high arrest rate and short temper, scanned the room. Brenda hurried from her office, pointing a meticulously manicured finger directly at Vivian. "That's her!" Brenda exclaimed. "She's attempting to pass a bad check." Vivian turned, a look of confusion on her face. "Excuse me?" Officer Miller bypassed any preliminary inquiries. He didn't solicit her perspective or seek an explanation. He saw a black woman in a hoodie within an upscale bank, identified by the manager as a criminal. For him, that was sufficient. He covered the distance between them in 3 rapid strides. Underscore quote underscore 30. Underscore. Vivian raised her hands, palms open. Underscore quote underscore 31. Underscore quote underscore 32 underscore Miller barked, gripping Vivian's upper arm and yanking her backward. "Hey!" Vivian exclaimed, stumbling. "You have no right to touch me like that. I haven't done anything wrong." "Resisting won't help you," Miller sneered. He spun her around, forcing her chest against the cool marble of the writing desk in the center of the lobby. "I am not resisting," Vivian stated, her cheek pressed against the stone. "My name is Vivian Banks. I am the district attorney for this county. If you look in my wallet, you will find my badge." Miller erupted into a harsh, barking laugh. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England. We get a lot of liars in this city, but that's a new one. The district attorney dressed like a vagrant." "Check the ID, Officer Miller," Officer Jenkins suggested quietly, a note of unease in her voice. "Miller, perhaps we should just verify it." "I don't need to verify anything," Miller declared, producing handcuffs from his belt. "The manager says it's fraud. She's got a bag full of who knows what. We'll take her in and sort it out at the station. This is a classic fraud attempt." He snapped the handcuffs onto Vivian's wrists, the metal biting into her skin. Underscore quote underscore 43 Vivian stated, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. She ceased struggling, understanding that physical resistance would only serve to provide them with ammunition. Her strategy would be intellectual. Quote, 44, quote, 45, Miller gestured towards Brenda, who stood with her arms crossed, a smug expression on her face. Quote, 46, quote, 47, Brenda interjected swiftly, attempting to cover her tracks. Quote, 48, quote, 49, Miller grunted, hauling Vivian upright. Quote, 50, quote, 51, Vivian stated, her intense gaze locking with Miller's. The sheer force of her stare caused the officer to hesitate for a split second, but his ego was too substantial to permit him to retreat now. Get her into the car, Miller instructed Jenkins. They marched her out of the bank, drawing the attention of passers-by on the street, many of whom paused to record the event on their phones. Vivian Banks, the very woman who had recently secured a landmark election on a platform championing police reform and justice, was being publicly paraded from a bank, accused of the crime of possessing wealth as a black woman, as they unceremoniously shoved her into the rear of the patrol cruiser. Vivian looked through the window at Brenda, who was observing from the glass doors, offering a disingenuous, sarcastic wave. Vivian did not reciprocate. She simply closed her eyes, beginning to commit every minute detail of the encounter to memory. The time, the location, the badge numbers, the names. Where are we taking her? Jenkins inquired as she settled into the driver's seat. Quote, 55, quote, 56, Miller countered, occupying the passenger seat and adjusting the rearview mirror to fix his gaze on Vivian. Quote, 57, Vivian remained silent in the back, her wrists throbbing, but her mind was exceptionally sharp. She was keenly aware that today was a scheduled court day. In fact, she was slated to appear in courtroom 4B in precisely 2 hours for a high-profile arraignment hearing, a hearing where she was expected to personally represent the state. If they detained her, she would miss the proceeding. However, if she played her cards correctly, she wouldn't just make the hearing. She would make history. Officer, Vivian said calmly from the back seat. I thought you were remaining silent, Miller snapped back. I just have one question, Vivian continued. When we arrive at the station, will you be processing me immediately? Because I have a rather tight schedule today. Miller chuckled again. Honey, you're on my schedule now. You'll sit in that cell until I decide to process you. Perfect, Vivian whispered to herself. Absolutely perfect. She leaned back against the hard plastic seat. The trap was meticulously set. All they had to do was walk directly into it. The journey to the Midtown precinct was brief and charged with palpable tension. Officer Jenkins gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, casting nervous glances into the rearview mirror. Vivian's unnerving calm was unsettling to her. Most individuals apprehended for fraud were typically screaming, weeping, or pleading by this point. Vivian Banks exhibited none of these reactions. She simply gazed out the window, observing the cityscape, the very city she had sworn to protect, blur by in a streak of concrete and glass. Officer Miller, conversely, was in an exceptionally buoyant mood. He hummed along with the radio, his fingers dancing across the dash computer. Quote, 65, Miller bragged to dispatch. Quote, 66, quote, 67, Vivian's voice cut through the drone of the engine. Is that what we're adding to the charges now? Because I haven't refused to identify myself. In fact, I've implored you to examine my identification. Miller turned around, his face contorted with annoyance. You'll have your opportunity to speak when we book you. Until then, keep quiet. The cruiser glided into the precinct's sally port. The heavy garage doors clanged shut behind them, plunging the bay into an artificial twilight. Miller hauled Vivian out of the car with gratuitous force, his grip on her bicep tight enough to leave a mark. Quote, underscore 70, underscore, he commanded. They entered the precinct, a chaotic hive of activity. Phones rang incessantly, officers shouted across desks, and the air hung heavy with the combined aromas of stale coffee and floor wax. As Miller paraded Vivian through the bullpen towards the booking desk, several officers glanced up. Vivian scanned their faces, recognizing a few. She had prosecuted cases they had been involved in. She made eye contact with a detective named Ali, who was nursing a coffee by the water cooler. Ali frowned, tilting his head as if trying to place her face. Stripped of its customary power suit and makeup, Vivian held his gaze for a moment before Miller propelled her forward, severing the connection. Quote, underscore 71, underscore. The booking sergeant, a weary-looking man named Henderson, grunted without looking up. Quote, underscore 72, quote, underscore 73, Vivian stated flatly. Quote, underscore 74, Miller chuckled. Quote, underscore 75, Henderson finally looked up, squinting at Vivian. The harsh, unflattering precinct lighting flickered slightly. Vivian stood tall, unfazed by her attire or the handcuffs. Quote, underscore 76, Henderson sighed. Miller unlocked the cuffs. Vivian rubbed her wrists, noticing the nascent red welts where the metal had dug in. Deliberately and methodically, she reached into a tote bag that Miller had unceremoniously tossed onto the counter. Quote, underscore 77, Miller snapped. Quote, underscore 78, Vivian's hand brushed past her wallet as she reached into a side pocket, her fingers closing around the leather bifold case containing her badge. She withdrew it. Here is my identification, Vivian announced. She didn't hand it to Henderson. She slammed it down onto the counter with a resounding thwack that echoed through the room. Henderson lazily picked it up and flipped it open. The gold shield gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Beneath it, the laminated ID card read, Vivian Banks, District Attorney. Henderson froze, the color draining from his face instantaneously. He looked from the badge to the ID photo, then up at Vivian. The resemblance was undeniable. Quote, underscore 80. Henderson's voice was a strangled croak. Miller, you idiot, what? Miller, engrossed in completing an arrest form, responded, She's got a fake badge too. These scammers are getting good. Add impersonating an officer to the list. Miller! Henderson roared, rising so abruptly that his chair toppled over. The entire bullpen fell silent. Look at the damn badge! Miller frowned, annoyed, and walked over to snatch the leather case from Henderson. He stared at it, his thumb tracing the embossed letters, District Attorney. It appeared authentic. It felt authentic. He looked up at Vivian, who was not cowering, but observing him with the cold, predatory focus of a prosecutor, preparing to deliver a career-ending closing argument. This, Miller stammered, this is a very good fake. Where did you acquire it? Call the chief, Vivian commanded, her voice like ice. Call Chief O'Connor. Inform him that you have his district attorney in a holding cell. Tell him you arrested her for depositing a check while black. Go ahead. I'll wait. Miller hesitated, doubt beginning to chip away at his arrogance. I can verify it in the system, Jenkins whispered, typing furiously at a nearby terminal. A moment later, she gasped. She turned the monitor so Miller could see. Vivian Banks's personnel file was displayed, the photograph matching, the statistics aligning, quote, underscore 90, Jenkins breathed, quote, underscore 91, Miller dropped the badge onto the counter as if it were red-hot iron. He stepped back, his mouth opening and closing like a stranded fish. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't merely arrested a civilian, he had apprehended the city's chief prosecutor, the woman responsible for deciding which officers faced indictment for misconduct, the woman who authorized warrants. The silence in the precinct became deafening, every eye fixed upon them. ___quote _92 _ Miller stammered. An __quote _93 Vivian cut him off, taking a step towards him. For the first time, the burly officer flinched. __quote _94 _ She turned to Sergeant Henderson. __quote _95 _ Henderson scrambled to hand her the phone, his hands trembling. __quote _96 _ _97 Vivian replied, dialing a number, __quote _98 _ She hung up and fixed her gaze on Miller, the fear in his eyes now palpable. He knew his career hung precariously in the balance. __quote _99 _ Miller tried, his voice trembling. __quote _100 quote _101 Vivian stated sharply. _quote _102 The atmosphere in the precinct rapidly devolved from routine ennui to outright panic. The captain, a man named Reynolds, who was a mere 3 months from retirement and desperately sought to avoid any complications, burst from his office, his uniform shirt haphazardly buttoned. _quote _103 Captain Reynolds hurried down the stairs, nearly stumbling. _quote _104 quote _105 Vivian said, glancing at her watch. _quote _106 quote _107 Reynolds promised. _quote _108 quote _109 Vivian replied, a cruel, calculated smile touching her lips. She turned her gaze back to Officer Miller, who was attempting to render himself invisible behind a filing cabinet. Quote _110 Miller's head snapped up. Me? You initiated this journey, Miller, Vivian stated. You will conclude it, and you will do so precisely as I direct. I am not changing clothes. I am not grooming my hair. I want the court to witness precisely what the district attorney looks like when she attempts to run errands on her day off. Miss Banks, surely you would wish to freshen up, Reynolds suggested nervously. I said no, Vivian barked, her command in her voice causing the captain to straighten up. This is now evidence. Miller, fetch the keys. Jenkins, you will drive. Miller, you will ride in the back with me. We have matters to discuss. The dynamic within the cruiser was drastically altered. En route to the courthouse, Officer Jenkins drove with the urgency of a professional racer, sirens blaring, weaving through traffic to gain precious minutes. In the rear compartment, the barrier separating the front from the back felt oppressively small for Miller. Vivian occupied the right side, Miller the left. The handcuffs were gone, but Miller appeared more ensnared than he ever had in his life. So, Officer Miller, Vivian inquired conversationally, though her tone was anything but amicable, how long have you been on the force? 15 years, Miller mumbled, his gaze fixed on his knees. 15 years. And in 15 years, you never learned that probable cause necessitates more than a manager's ill temper? Vivian questioned. Tell me, if I had been a white woman in a suit depositing that check, would you have cuffed me before requesting identification? I went with the information I had, Miller defended weakly. You went with the prejudice you harbor, Vivian corrected him. You saw a hoodie and a skin color, and you constructed the narrative. Do you know what State versus Dan Kowalski pertains to, Miller? Miller shook his head. It's a corruption case. Vivian explained. It involves a city councilman who believed his position rendered him immune. He thought the rules didn't apply to him because of who he was. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Miller offered no response, sweating profusely. We're nearing our destination, Jenkins announced from the front. Excellent, Vivian replied. She leaned in conspiratorially toward Miller. Once we enter that chamber, your sole duty is to escort me to the prosecutor's station, and then you will occupy a seat in the front row and observe. You are not to depart until I give you leave. Is that clear? Affirmative, ma'am, Miller responded in a hushed tone. The police vehicle skidded to an abrupt stop before the imposing marble edifice of the Hall of Justice. A contingent of journalists was already assembled near the steps, anticipating the high-profile proceedings. They turned their attention as the patrol car arrived, expecting perhaps a witness or a litigant. Instead, they witnessed Officer Jenkins disembark and open the rear door. From it emerged a woman clad in athletic wear and a hooded sweatshirt, followed by a police officer whose countenance was pale and etched with apprehension. Flashes from cameras illuminated the scene. Quote, 127, a correspondent called out. Vivian did not pause to answer questions. She proceeded purposefully up the steps. With Miller trailing in her wake like a chastened animal, her movement possessed a determined force that effectively parted the assembled throng. Inside the courthouse, the security personnel did a double take. Quote, 128, the head of security inquired, his gaze lingering on her attire. Quote, 129, she stated, circumventing the metal detectors and presenting her identification. The very same identification that Miller had previously derided. She strode down the corridor, the subtle squeak of her footwear audible on the polished flooring. Her heart was a rapid drumbeat, not of fear, but of sheer exhilaration. She was on the precipice of transforming a personal indignity into a public lesson. Courtroom 4B was densely occupied. An palpable sense of anticipation permeated the atmosphere. Judge Harrison, a man renowned for his unwavering adherence to protocol and punctuality, occupied the bench, his eyes fixed on the wall clock. The time was 5 minutes past 10 in the morning. Quote, 130, Judge Harrison addressed the defense attorney, peering over his spectacles. Quote, 131, quote, 132, Sterling remarked, a smile gracing his lips. Quote, 133. A murmur of amusement swept through the defense contingent. Quote, 134, Judge Harrison stated with a gruff tone. Quote, 135, quote, 136, Sterling quipped. Quote, 137, At precisely that juncture, the imposing double mahogany doors at the rear of the courtroom were thrown open with a resounding bang, drawing every eye. Vivian Banks stood silhouetted in the doorway. Her appearance was disheveled. Her hair was partially escaping its coiffure. Her gray hooded garment was creased, and erythematous marks were visible on her wrists. Beside her stood Officer Miller, his expression suggesting a fervent desire for the floor to engulf him. Quote, 138, Vivian's voice boomed, echoing across the courtroom. It was a voice of authority, instantly quelling the low hum of conversation. She proceeded down the central aisle. The onlookers collectively gasped. Whispers circulated frantically. Why is she attired in such a manner? Is she unwell? Sterling's smile evaporated. He appeared perplexed. Quote, 140. Vivian disregarded Sterling's interjection. She advanced directly to the prosecution's table, deposited her canvas bag upon the polished wood, and then addressed the judge. Quote, 141, Vivian stated, regaining her breath but maintaining a steady tone. Quote, 142, Judge Harrison raised his eyebrows so high they nearly met his hairline, peering at her over his spectacles. Quote, 143, quote, 144, Vivian asserted, her voice projecting to the rear of the room where the press was situated. Quote, 145, the courtroom erupted. Quote, 146, Harrison commanded, striking his gavel. Quote, 147, Judge Harrison inquired, his voice laced with astonishment. Quote, 148. Vivian turned slowly and gestured toward Officer Miller, who stood awkwardly near the railing. Quote, 149, quote, 150, Sterling inquired, unable to suppress his curiosity. Quote, 151, Vivian stated, her gaze fixed upon the jury. Quote, 152, she turned back to the judge. Quote, 153, she inhaled deeply. Quote, 154, a profound silence descended upon the room. The quiet was so absolute, one could have heard a pin drop. Officer Miller was now visibly trembling. Quote, 155, Vivian continued, opening her tote bag and retrieving her case files, which she then placed with a decisive thud on the table beside her hooded garment. Quote, 156, Sterling's gaze shifted to the jury. They were observing Vivian not with disapproval of her attire, but with a palpable sense of admiration. He understood in that instant that the momentum of the entire legal proceeding had irrevocably shifted. Vivian was no longer merely a legal advocate. She had become an emblem. The prosecution is prepared, Vivian declared. Judge Harrison regarded her, a subtle glint of profound respect evident in his eyes. He inclined his head once. Proceed, Miss Banks. Vivian adjusted her hooded garment, stood erect in her worn footwear, and commenced her opening statement. She was no longer merely litigating a case. She was declaring a full-scale assault on the entrenched corruption of the established order. And Officer Miller, positioned in the corner, apprehended that his moment of reckoning had merely begun. News of the incident disseminated with a speed that outpaced the verdict in State versus Kowalski. By the time Vivian Banks egressed the courthouse late that afternoon, the world had undergone a transformation. She had secured a victory in her case against the corrupt councilman, an achievement that would typically have dominated the evening news cycles. However, on this particular day, the headlines conveyed a distinctly different narrative. District attorney detained at bank. Racial profiling captured on video. Vivian descended the courthouse steps, still in her hooded attire, but now accompanied by her entire legal team, impeccably dressed in sharp suits. The contrast was stark. The gathering of journalists had tripled in size. Microphones were thrust towards her face. Miss Banks, are you pursuing charges against the police department? Miss Banks, what is your statement regarding Sovereign Capital Bank? Vivian halted at the designated podium, erected at the base of the stairs. She raised her hand, and the crowd fell silent. Officer Miller was conspicuously absent. He had been escorted away by internal affairs investigators the moment the court session concluded, his firearm and badge confiscated pending a thorough inquiry. Today, Vivian began, her voice clear and unwavering, I experienced a mere fraction of the humiliation that far too many citizens endure on a daily basis. I was judged not on my actions, but on my outward appearance. I was presumed culpable before my name was even solicited. Brenda Higgins, the manager of Sovereign Capital, deemed me a wrongdoer. Officer Derek Miller decided I was undeserving of basic courtesy. They presumed their authority granted them license to debase me. They were mistaken. And commencing tomorrow morning, my office will initiate a comprehensive independent inquiry. This investigation will encompass not only my detention, but also the operational practices of the Midtown Precinct and the discriminatory policies in effect at Sovereign Capital. This matter extends beyond my personal experience. It is representative of every individual who lacked a badge to provide them recourse. The assembled crowd erupted in a chorus of cheers, though the unfolding drama was far from concluded. Back at Sovereign Capital Bank, Brenda Higgins was engaged in a frantic effort to shred documents. Her corporate superiors had contacted her 20 minutes prior. They were decidedly displeased. The video footage depicting Vivian's forceful removal had gone viral, amassing millions of views. The bank's stock value was experiencing a decline. I was merely adhering to protocol, Brenda exclaimed into the telephone, speaking to a regional director, Mr. Charles Whitmore. You detained the district attorney, Brenda, Whitmore responded forcefully. You summoned law enforcement against a woman attempting to deposit a legitimate financial instrument. Do you possess any comprehension of the repercussions of your actions? The public relations catastrophe is unprecedented. She appeared suspicious. She was wearing a hooded garment. Since when has personal comfort been a criminal offense? You are suspended. Brenda, effective immediately. Vacate the branch. Brenda slammed the receiver down. She was disinclined to surrender without a struggle. She retrieved her handbag and the shredding bin, intending to effect an unobserved departure via the rear exit. However, upon opening the back door, she discovered her egress obstructed. Standing there were two detectives, Ali and a Detective Rodriguez. Behind them was a marked police vehicle. Brenda Higgins? Detective Ali inquired, his expression grave. Yes, I am in a hurry, Brenda retorted curtly. You are under arrest, Ali stated, producing handcuffs. Brenda gasped. For what? I have committed no offense. Filing a false police report, Rodriguez enumerated, misuse of emergency services, and based on our preliminary audit of the bank's transaction logs, aggravated fraud. The revelation struck Brenda with the force of a physical blow. This was not merely about Vivian. Vivian's inquiry had inadvertently triggered an automatic audit of Brenda's suspicious activity flags. It transpired that Brenda had a proclivity for flagging accounts belonging to minority customers, subsequently freezing their assets, and then siphoning minor fee amounts into an offshore account, under the assumption that they would either overlook the discrepancy or be too intimidated to contest it. She was not safeguarding the bank's interests. She was leveraging her inherent biases as a shield for her personal malfeasance. Quote, 174, Brenda shrieked as the handcuffs were secured. Quote, 175, Ali remarked with a dry, sardonic smile. Quote, 176, The irony was so pronounced it was almost suffocating. Brenda Higgins was processed at the Midtown Precinct, the very same facility where Vivian had been held just hours prior. She was fingerprinted by Sergeant Henderson, a man entirely unsympathetic to her histrionics. Quote, 177, Brenda complained as he pressed her fingers onto the ink pad. Quote, 178, Henderson responded flatly, disregarding her protestations. They escorted her to the holding cells. The precinct was exceptionally crowded that evening. No individual cells were available. Brenda, attired in her expensive pencil skirt and silk blouse, was ushered into a communal holding cell occupied by women apprehended for various infractions. She retreated to a corner, hugging herself, her gaze fixed with disdain upon the graffiti adorning the walls. Quote, 179, a woman with a pierced nose commented from a bench. Quote, 180, Brenda announced, attempting to reassert her former authority. Quote, 181, quote, 182, The woman chuckled. Across town, Derek Miller sat in his darkened living room, a bottle of whiskey on the adjacent table. His mobile device buzzed incessantly, bombarded by threats, insults, and calls from journalists. His visage was ubiquitous. The viral video depicted him sneering, quote, 183, The internet had transformed him into a cultural icon of incompetence and arrogance. His union representative contacted him at 9 o'clock in the evening. Miller, this is dire, the representative stated. Can you safeguard my pension? Miller inquired, his voice faltering. Derek, the chief intends to make an example. The mayor is involved. Vivian Banks is personally overseeing the prosecution of the fraud charges against the bank manager. However, concerning your actions, she is advocating for civil rights violations. Federal charges, Derek. Miller dropped the phone. He had dedicated 15 years to intimidating individuals he perceived as powerless. He had spent 15 years believing his badge rendered him omnipotent. Now, the very system he had upheld was poised to dismantle him. The subsequent morning, the arraignment for Brenda Higgins was scheduled. Vivian Banks entered the courtroom. She was attired in her professional suit, exuding an impeccable presence. She assumed her position at the prosecution's table. Brenda was led in, clad in an orange jumpsuit. Her silk blouse was absent. Her hair was disheveled from a night spent on a concrete slab. She appeared diminutive, pallid, and terrified. Upon recognizing Vivian, Brenda began to weep. Quote, 187 Vivian glanced up from her documents, her expression unyielding. Quote, 188, Vivian stated, her voice amplified by the microphone, ensuring it resonated throughout the entire chamber. Quote, 189, The judge, a stern woman identified as Judge Thorne, regarded Brenda. Quote, 190, Judge Thorne ruled. Quote, 191, the gavel struck. Brenda cried out as she was forcibly removed. However, the retribution for her actions was not yet complete. 6 months had elapsed since the incident at Sovereign Capital Bank. Yet, for Derek Miller and Brenda Higgins, time had offered no solace. It had merely facilitated the insidious decay of their lives from within, a consequence of their own decisions. The seasons had transitioned from the crisp autumnal air to the oppressive, humid heat of early summer, a fitting backdrop for the scorching legal reckoning that was imminent. The city courthouse had ceased to be merely a building for them. It had become the maw of a formidable entity, slowly consuming them. The media's fervor had subsided, the initial viral outrage giving way to a cold, unyielding scrutiny. The public no longer sought a mere apology. They demanded retribution. They yearned to ascertain if the justice system was genuinely capable of holding its own accountable. Derek Miller's sentencing hearing was the first item on the docket. The courtroom was oppressively crowded. Typically, the gallery would be filled with officers in uniform during a trial involving one of their own, presenting a silent front of solidarity. However, on this day, the gallery behind the defense table was conspicuously devoid of such support. There was no blue wall of silence for Derek Miller. His conduct, his arrogance, the undeniable racism captured on high-definition security footage, and his disrespectful mockery of a district attorney had rendered him an outcast. Even the police union had discreetly withdrawn their financial support for his defense, leaving Miller with a court-appointed public defender who appeared visibly fatigued even before the proceedings commenced. Miller occupied the defendant's table. He bore no resemblance to the imposing, self-assured bully who had forcefully pressed Vivian Banks against a marble counter. He had lost 30 pounds. His suit hung loosely on his frame. His complexion was sallow, and his hands trembled uncontrollably, causing the water glass to clink with every attempted sip. Vivian Banks was seated in the front row of the prosecution section. Today, she was not present in her capacity as the district attorney, but as the victim. She was attired in a simple navy dress, her expression inscrutable. She observed Miller's back, patiently awaiting the proceedings. Judge Harrison, the same magistrate who had overseen the initial chaotic events, presided once more. He had specifically requested to retain jurisdiction over the case, resolute in his determination to bring closure. Mr. Miller, Judge Harrison's voice was low, resonating off the wood-paneled walls. Quote, 193, Miller rose to his feet, his legs unsteady. Quote, 194, Quote, 195, the judge continued, removing his spectacles. Quote, 196, Miller stared fixedly at the floor. A single bead of sweat traced a path down his nose, splashing onto the table. Quote, 197, Judge Harrison stated. Quote, 198, a collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Miller's head snapped up. You betrayed the oath that every honorable officer in this city swears to uphold, Harrison declared, his voice escalating. You transformed the badge into an emblem of fear rather than security. For that transgression, a price must be paid. The gavel was raised. Derek Miller, I sentence you to 7 years in a federal correctional institution. You are to be remanded into custody immediately. You are stripped of your pension. You are permanently disqualified from any public service employment. 7 years. Miller's knees buckled. He clutched the table to maintain his balance. 7 years in federal prison represented a de facto death sentence for a former law enforcement officer. It signified isolation. It meant facing each day with the constant threat of retaliation. Quote, 203 a voice cried out from the rear of the room. It was his soon-to-be ex-wife, weeping. He turned to look at her. But the marshals were already upon him. The click of the handcuffs echoed the same sound he had used on Vivian, but this time the metal bit into his own wrists. As they escorted him out through a side door, Miller cast a final glance toward the gallery. His eyes met Vivian Banks's one last time. He observed no anger in her gaze, nor triumph. He saw pity. And that realization broke him more profoundly than any anger could have. He understood in that moment his own insignificance. He had always been small. The badge had merely been a costume. If Miller's downfall was tragic, Brenda Higgins's was a spectacular implosion fueled by avarice. Her trial had not concluded with a plea bargain. Brenda, driven by narcissism and a profound inability to confront reality, had insisted on proceeding to trial. She remained convinced that a jury would sympathize with her perspective, believing she was merely a diligent manager safeguarding her institution. She was gravely mistaken. The trial spanned 2 weeks and was nothing short of a complete annihilation of her defense. Vivian's office recused themselves to circumvent any potential conflict of interest, appointing a special prosecutor from the state capitol, a formidable figure named Eleanor Graves. Graves meticulously dissected Brenda's life with surgical precision. The audit Vivian had initiated had uncovered far more than a single false report. It revealed a sophisticated scheme of financial skimming. Brenda had been targeting accounts that had remained dormant for extended periods or belonged to elderly clients with cognitive impairments. She systematically transferred small service fees to a shell corporation under her control. The total illicit gains amounted to $2.4 million over an 8-year span. On the day the verdict was to be delivered, Brenda wore a pristine white suit, attempting to project an aura of innocence. However, as the jury foreman rose to announce the decision, an almost palpable tension filled the courtroom. Guilty on all counts, the foreman declared. Wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, filing a false police report, and obstruction of justice. Brenda emitted a sharp, strangled cry. No, that is impossible. Judge Harrison silenced her with a stern glare. Miss Higgins, please stand for sentencing. Brenda rose, trembling. She glanced at her expensive defense attorney, but he was already closing his briefcase. He understood the futility of further protest. Brenda Higgins, the judge began, you were entrusted with the financial security of this community. You occupied that glass-walled office, looking down upon the very individuals who placed their life savings in your care. You judged Miss Banks based on her attire, yet you yourself were the thief, cloaked in an expensive suit. I was going to repay it, Brenda sobbed, her composure finally shattering. It was merely a loan. You targeted the vulnerable, the judge interjected, cutting her off. When apprehended, you attempted to manipulate law enforcement, aiming to ruin an innocent woman's reputation and conceal your illicit activities. This level of malevolence is seldom witnessed in this courtroom. The sentence was delivered with the crushing finality of a heavy hammer. Quote, 213. Brenda shrieked. It was a guttural, raw cry from a woman watching her entire existence crumble into dust. She was no longer the affluent, influential branch manager. She was inmate number 8,940. She was utterly ruined. As the bailiff moved to escort her, Brenda lunged towards the railing where Charles Whitmore, the regional director of the bank, was seated. Quote, 214. She screamed, her voice strained, spittle flying. Whitmore rose, adjusted his tie. and regarded her with a chilling, corporate indifference. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 215, underscore, underscore. She was forcibly removed, thrashing and yelling, her pristine white suit disheveled, her dignity shattered on the polished courtroom floor. Vivian waited until the room had emptied. The quiet that followed the tumult was profound, yet it was a cleansing silence, like the air after a fierce storm has washed the streets clean. She departed through the imposing oak doors, stepping into the marble corridor. The press had gathered outside the building, but Vivian bypassed the main entrance. She opted for a service exit, leading her into the modest courtyard garden used by courthouse personnel. Seated on a concrete bench, appearing anxious, was a young woman named Sophie. Sophie, 22 years old, a student juggling 2 jobs, was among the individuals whose lives Elena Graves had powerfully illuminated on the witness stand. Brenda had systematically depleted Sophie's college fund, $5,000 bequeathed by her late grandmother under the guise of account maintenance fees. Sophie looked up as Vivian approached. "Is it finished?" Sophie inquired, her voice barely a whisper. "It is finished," Vivian confirmed, taking a seat beside her. "She will be incarcerated for a considerable duration, Sophie, and the seizure order has been officially signed. You will recover your grandmother's funds." "With interest," Sophie breathed, releasing a breath she seemed to have held captive for a year. Tears welled in her eyes. "I truly believed no one would ever listen to me. When I went to the branch to lodge a complaint," she recalled, "Brenda, she looked at me as if I were worthless. She told me I couldn't grasp basic arithmetic. She made me feel utterly insignificant." Vivian gently took the young woman's hand. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 222, underscore, underscore, she explained. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 223. Underscore, 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 quote, underscore, 224, underscore, underscore, Sophie asked, dabbing her eyes. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 225, underscore, underscore, Sophie emitted a watery, relieved laugh. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 226, underscore, 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 quote, underscore, 227, underscore, underscore, Vivian stated firmly. She rose and smoothed her dress. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 228, underscore, underscore, Vivian proceeded to her car, a practical sedan parked in a designated spot. She felt an unprecedented lightness, a burden lifted after months of strain. The sun was descending, painting long shadows across the city's silhouette. She opened the trunk to place her briefcase inside. There, nestled in a corner, were the faded gray hoodie and the canvas tote bag she had worn that fateful day. For a fleeting moment, she contemplated discarding them. They were tangible reminders of a past trauma, of a period of profound vulnerability. Yet, she left them untouched. They now served as her protective shield, a testament to the fact that justice transcends legal statutes and scholarly texts. It encompasses the gritty realities of the streets, the humble hoodies, the tailored suits, and everyone navigating the spectrum in between. She settled into the driver's seat and ignited the engine. Her phone chimed. It was her father. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 229, underscore, underscore, she answered, activating the speakerphone as she exited the parking lot. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 230, underscore, underscore, her father's voice, warm and laced with pride, crackled through the speaker. They say she received 15 years. They say the officer got 7. They did, Vivian confirmed. You did exceptionally well, baby girl. He murmured. Mama would be immensely proud. She always said you were rather stubborn. Vivian chuckled, turning onto the main thoroughfare. I'm not stubborn, Dad. I'm simply persistent. It's all the same, he quipped. Are you coming for Sunday dinner? I'm preparing collard greens. I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. She ended the call and continued driving. The city lights began to shimmer, illuminating the urban landscape. Somewhere within this vast metropolis, another fraudulent executive, another prejudiced officer, another injustice lay in wait. The mission was far from complete. It would never be entirely finished. But tonight, the scales had found a measure of equilibrium. Tonight, the righteous had prevailed. And as Vivian Banks navigated the encroaching darkness, she understood her readiness for any confrontation that lay ahead. This narrative illustrates how Vivian Banks transformed a moment of disrespect into a powerful crusade for justice. It serves as a potent reminder that prejudice is not merely cruel, it carries a substantial cost. Officer Miller forfeited his liberty, and Brenda Higgins lost her entire empire, all because they were incapable of transcending their own deeply ingrained biases. It truly prompts contemplation of karma. We often perceive karma as an ethereal force, but within this account, karma was merely the unavoidable consequence of arrogance encountering unwavering competence. Vivian required no arcane intervention. She simply needed the unvarnished truth and the fortitude to stand her ground. I am eager to hear your experiences in the comments section. Have you ever been subjected to judgment based on your appearance in a retail establishment or a public setting? How did you navigate such a situation? Did you experience your own Vivian Banks moment? Let's engage in a discussion below. If this narrative held your rapt attention, I would greatly appreciate it if you would click the like button. Your engagement significantly aids the YouTube algorithm in showcasing this video to a wider audience. For those new to this channel, please consider subscribing and enabling notifications to ensure you don't miss our subsequent in-depth explorations of real-life dramas and justice. Thank you profoundly for your viewership. Remain safe, practice kindness, and always remember, never underestimate the individual standing before you.